Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Louis Jean. We're going to reflect on his years of public service, which will come to an end in December. Louis, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Tony. Looking forward to it.
Jolly good. Now, looking at your career in politics, how many years did it span?
18 years, with a break in between from 2000, the millennium year, through to 2012 and back again until 2020.
Wow. What made you get into politics in the first place, Louis?
I think there was always a lot of political conversation around our table up Longy Road and when I was a boy, and Billy Shade was a frequent visitor to our house, always talking politics. And then later, as I grew up, I started, my great uncle Archie Rowe, who owned the Chevalier's farm, it took a real interest in directing me towards the people's meetings. And so I used to go along with my great uncle, and that's really how it all began.
So you blame it on the ancestors?
I blame it on the ancestors. Yes, I do. They did a pretty good job of it.
Now, during your time with the States, you did hold office in Guernsey for a while. That's pretty important, that position, isn't it?
That's a very important position. I had around 12 years in Guernsey altogether. And the first years were very interesting because it was a very different states, and the states in Guernsey has changed again. I'll see if I can explain what I mean. There were a lot of business people first time around on the Guernsey States, and they were quite high powered and quite a lot of advocates as well, and they were really very interesting and very good at their job. The states changed and became, in these recent times, more populated with people who weren't in business in Guernsey, and that had sort of a different effect on the way the states worked. It wasn't as galvanized, and it didn't seem to be achieving the things that it did in the early 90s. But now things have swung full circle, and the Guernsey States seem to have moved back again to a very big business element amongst its membership. And that will be interesting, and interesting for Alderney too.
Keep going, Louis.
Well, I particularly enjoyed my time in the Guernsey States, and during the 90s, I became deputy chair of sea fisheries with Ron Lemunyon working on the committee, and another man who entered politics at that time as a fisherman's representative was Lyndon Trott. He came in as the fisherman's representative after Dougal Lane, and that was his entry into politics. So it's quite interesting what you see when you work in Guernsey.
Yeah. Sorry, it broke up a little bit then. The Guernsey Connection, representation in the States of Guernsey by Alderney, is very important, yes?
Yes, it is indeed. It's very important that it's a good, strong representation, and that we have those links. They're very important because Guernsey and Alderney, I know thereabouts when Guernsey is saying that it should be more independent. I don't really agree with that. In terms of taxation of various things that are going on in the Alderney States, we should remain with Guernsey and very close to Guernsey. And I think that's extremely important. And our membership, our 2 members in the Guernsey States, are also very important to us.
Louis, can we have a look now at the States of Alderney? Because no CEO, or rather only 1 out of 4 has gone the full term. We've got no engineer at the moment. We've got no greffier and no director of tourism. And I think Liz will be off on a little bit of maternity leave shortly. What's happening to the place, Louis?
Well, I think a lot of that was partly due, some of it certainly, to the fact that we had difficulties with the previous CEO, which have now been reconciled. and that those appointments weren't made through that and should have been made. Some of them certainly should have been made. I am upset, however, that I feel that the appointment of a new CEO is being rushed without looking at the contract, without looking at the various conditions and terms of employment and what's on offer. And I believe that it should change from the grassroots right the way up. I believe it needs changing because of just what you mentioned, that the last three haven't run their full term. And to be quite honest with you, there've been difficulty in each area there. And I think myself that the whole thing should be looked at and the framework completely rebuilt to put this job on so that people know who's working for who and who's doing what. Because at times, I certainly felt that we were working for the CEO and the CEO at various times didn't feel as if he was working for us. So what's happened is the appointment, I think, has got too big. And in getting too big, it means that they feel that they have more power than the actual states member himself. And that is what should be reversed.
Yeah. Do you think that will be easy to do? I mean, the fact that quite a few people from the current Policy and Finance Committee will be moving on, yourself and James Dent included, is this a good opportunity? Or do you really think with a CEO, the states themselves shouldn't be making the choice? They should get professional headhunters in to come up with a sensible shortlist to make sure things do come a bit better next time round.
I'm not really happy about the interviewing panel. I believe there should be far more professional people from Guernsey choosing the applicant, the right applicant. They're very experienced at it. Now, but it is happening, and it's probably going to happen, I suspect, before Christmas, which means there is no time to examine, as I've said, the contracts and to change the way that we approach this post. And without that, I think it may well be another difficult situation unless we're very lucky and we get the right person and they operate well within that framework. And I don't know that I can see that after the problems we've had with the last three.
Track record is bad. 3 out of 4 failures was obviously just waiting for his pension before he moved on, but the other 3 didn't make their time.
No, exactly. It's been very difficult. It's been a difficult year through it as well.
Yeah. No, we accept the fact that COVID has obviously changed things quite considerably, but nevertheless, it does seem a bit strange that you haven't had an engineer for well over a year. The greffier moved on, and it seemed that nothing was done to try and recruit somebody else. Director of Tourism moves on. It just seems too strange to me. Coming back, Louis, to your point about the civil service being too powerful, they shouldn't have the sort of power that they're currently wielding, should they?
No, I don't think so. I think that at the moment, and I think it's probably got out of sync because of the situation we've faced this year and last with the civil service. And basically, we've got a situation where I feel at the moment, on quite a lot of the items, the civil service are controlling the politicians. And that's really a difficult situation. And there has to be a redrawing of the delineation line between the two jobs and what the civil service can do. I mean, the civil service should be providing us with information and serving us. Civil service, that's what it says.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
It seems to me to be doing far more than that. And that is a difficult thing. So it needs the politicians to be stronger than they are. They're a very amiable bunch at the moment. They're a very pleasant bunch. I like them all, I really do. But they're fairly laid back, and they will let themselves be controlled. And that's something they must resist. I believe they must resist it, and they must push the civil service to do as a good civil service should, which is provide information and lead up to the decision making, and then let the politicians get on and make the decisions once they're fully informed. That's what it's really about.
Yeah. And do you think really we've gone through a period of weak political leadership, Louis?
I'm afraid so, I do, yes. I don't think it's been strong at all. And I think that's been part of the problem. And all of the circumstances have welled up and combined to create a situation where it's out of balance. It hasn't worked for quite some time. And it needs to change in order for it to work. And so basically people have got to be told where their boundaries are, how far they can come, what they can do, and what's expected of them. And with a reminder like that would then come a better practice in decision making, and the states members themselves must be stronger than they have been.
Now, you've served under how many presidents? Is it 4 or 5?
Let me see. 1, 2, 3, yes, 4. 4 I've served under.
Okay. That would include George Barron or not?
George Barron, John K. Mallet, Stuart Trout, and now William Tate. I didn't work with Sir Norman Browse. I was out during his period in office, but I did work with him on the Maritime Trust. He was chair of that, and I worked with him there. So you could say I worked with him as well, but not in a states function.
Looking at John K. Mowat, for example, how did he run the states? Because it seems to have run a lot smoother during his time than it has in current times.
I think I'm inclined to agree with you there, but also there's something that we all have to bear in mind, and that is that I believe the times were much easier then. There was much more affluence, more money about, people were getting interest. There were a lot of good things going on there that, despite inflation and people constantly groaning about the cost of this, that, and the other, they were relatively good times and relatively prosperous times. And it is easier, I believe, to run and be part of a government during easier times when things are better.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, I think, in terms of how things happen. The number of politicians equated to the number of on the electorate, we're a bit overrepresented, aren't we?
Yeah, well, there are some that say that. I would say that you can be overrepresented if your state is not strong. If you have a good, strong state and it's effectively working from one end to the other. And I have seen the Alderney states work well. And when it does work well, it can work really well. But it would always attract criticism in a situation where it's not working so well. And this last 4 years, it hasn't worked well.
And you can only...
I missed that bit, I'm sorry. Could you run again?
Yeah, don't worry. I said you can only blame 1 year out of those 4 on COVID. There were three other years where life was, reasonably spontaneous. Now, we had this incident before at the by-election, actually, over this question of how you define residence. Do you think the Lieutenant Governor should have got involved on that one?
No, I think the Lieutenant Governor is right to hold back. I think it would have been wrong for him to involve himself. The law officers are more than capable of dealing with it. We're very well advised and very well looked after by the law officers, and they're a very able set of people there, and they're well able to deal with that. I think the Lieutenant Governor did quite the right thing in keeping out and letting the Government of Alderney law be altered slightly in the way that it was, so that it is clearer. It isn't that it wasn't there, it is that there was confusion about it. And where there's confusion, you've got to bring order. So the best thing to do is put it to the law officers and let them put in a sentence or two with the right terminology and sort it.
So you're happy with it now? You're happy with the definition?
Yes, I think it's fairly, it's well enough spelt out now. It's fine. Fine, it'll do the job.
Yeah. Okay, Louis, just let me make this mention to everyone watching. You're watching Tony at 12. Tony LeBlanc with retiring States member Louis Jean, looking at how things have gone over his long term as a politician. Louis, coming on to the recent election, the turnout was pretty low, wasn't it, given normal circumstances?
Yeah, a lot was made of that. I don't think it was as low as was made of it. I thought it was a fairly good turnout. It's not bad. Not bad at all. You know, it could have been a lot worse.
I think, the other side of the argument says that people are getting so disenchanted, they're not bothering to go along.
Well, I think that there's something in that, but there's also another thing, Tony. I think it's important to point out. In the last election, we're talking about the states members, that they say that not many turned out. Well, yes, but there were very few candidates. If you remember, in previous elections, there have been 10, 11 candidates. When you get 10 or 11 candidates, you get their families and their following and their friends all turn out, and the turnout then improves vastly. And people say it was a marvellous turnout for Alderney. I've seen 75 and 76%, and people saying how wonderful that is and how they wish they could get that kind of turnout in Guernsey. So do you follow what I mean? It swings and roundabouts.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. And it's how the people are at the time. Let's come on to another subject that I know you want to have a quick word about, and that's the code of conduct. Because it seems to me that the code of conduct can be used by rival politicians on the odd occasion to make a point.
I think I've got to be fairly careful, because what I say now will only ever be interpreted as out of bitterness. And it isn't. I've recently fought a 6-month battle over a code of conduct. I have no bitterness at all, because no real judgment was published about me. But it went on for 6 months, and it was basically a nothing. It was an absolute nothing. And I can't understand how we can get into such a thing. I believe we need to go back to the previous code of conduct, and the states itself needs to be in a situation where people who don't like other politicians saying something that they would regard as critical of them, and then taking action. And the thing is about my code of conduct, I was actually tipped off 3 months before through the Chamber of Commerce, through Guernsey, and a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce here in Alderney, that they were coming for me. Yeah. So I actually knew before it happened that they were going to come at me with something. That's extraordinary, to know that they're actually planning something to get you 2 or 3 months before it happens. And that did happen. And 2 or 3 months later, sure enough, I was in for the code of conduct. I think
it was pretty trivial, wasn't it?
Very trivial. It was over 2 civil servants I'd written to, actually. It was very trivial, and they were part of the committee. So it was so trivial, really was, what can I say? Nothing. And it's a shame. It's a shame that amount of time had to be spent on such a thing. It's a waste of time.
Yeah. Now, let's have a quick talk about the TRP and the amalgamation with the occupiers' rates. So far, no one's been told over here quite how they're going to collect it. I understand they may be using the cadastre system by collecting it monthly, but, it's a bit late in the day, isn't it?
It's been proven to be a mess. The MOJ have rejected it, and they won't send it on. to Privy Council. I am the only States member that's actually asked questions regarding whether we may see the correspondence. I've been told by one of the civil servants that we're not entitled to see the correspondence. I've stated between the MOJ and the Privy Council and the various people here in Alderney and the law officers, I requested that correspondence and I'm told I can't have it. I'm still requesting it. But the point about it is this is being civil service led. Not only is it civil service led, it isn't working out, and the States members here, I believe that their reputation is being impugned by the fact that it's being rejected by the MOJ and held back. And they've held it back on two grounds. One of them is they will not allow them to put the ambulance into it, and they will not allow them to charge 5%, which they wanted to. They may have that reduced. And also they refuse to let them have clause 3G, which is the mechanism by which it can be raised, or at any time the Alderney government want to raise it. That's been removed as well. Well, my feeling is there's not a great deal left. The only thing that's actually left now is to alter the percentage, which has been altered by 3%, as we well know. Guernsey are not happy for us to have a different rate of TRP to them, and we will have. Ours is going to be higher. And the other thing I cannot get the answer to is whether the thing has been sent on by the MOJ to Privy Council for approval, because so far it's the first stage that's held it up at the MOJ, hasn't even been to Privy Council. But they're working. What I find strange is they're working on it and they're passing all this stuff in the Alderney States when there are still all these questions, and none of the states members are going along with it, but they haven't seen the correspondence, and I can't get the correspondence. And as long as that's the case, I won't go along with it.
But we've only got 3 weeks to go before the end of the year. It just seems to be totally crazy that we get to this time. You know, it's almost as silly as Brexit, isn't it? Taking it right up to the line. And if the MOJ won't agree with the terms that are being suggested, where does that leave the states?
Well, that'd be very interesting, because they really, at the moment, my view of it is they should have been more open with the public and told them of the difficulties that they were facing. The advice has come from outside of the States of Alderney, which is, to my mind, also quite unsatisfactory. And if it happens that they can't go through with it, then a clean breast is going to have to be made of it, and the two taxes will have to remain separate. But as I say, I can't even see the correspondence. And this is the difficulty with being a States member. You should be seeing that correspondence. It's very important. It is the correspondence that helps you to make the decisions. If the rest of the states want to work in the dark like that, it's up to them. But I can't do that. I must see the correspondence.
Yeah, well, that's fair comment, isn't it? But I just can't really see why they had to change it in the first place. You could have continued TRP with Alderney getting the money and continue running the occupiers' rates alongside it.
I think it's quite interesting because it creates another anomaly, which in tax law, all people should be and must be treated equally.
Yeah.
And the point about this is that any other member of the states who, for instance, only has a house, there is no change at all. The only change comes to a minority of people in Alderney who earn a living from, or part of their living from investment income.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then suddenly you find yourself a duly appointed tax collector for the States of Alderney, because you get the bill, you have to pay it, and it's up to you to get it back from your tenants. And that, to my mind, is wrong. I think that's very wrong to do that to a minority of people. And I don't know if it isn't illegal. I really don't. And that's why I'd like to see the correspondence, because the rest of the answers may lie in that correspondence.
Yeah, that's accepted. 1948 agreement, do you see much mileage in that in terms of any revision?
No, I don't, because if you look at it, people go on that nothing's happened, nothing's happening, but it is happening. It's happening in the amalgamation of the taxes. It's happening in the fact that Alderney is taking back those taxes that we know of. And so in actual fact, it's a 1948 review in action. And I'm not entirely happy with it, because I have said in the States that I don't think that Alderney should be in control of its taxation. And I believe that those remarks have been borne out by the recent events and the rejection by the MOJ of the moves that the Alderney government is trying to make. And I believe that those suggestions of mine have been more than borne out and held up. I am correct.
Okay. Should we consider becoming a parish of Guernsey if they would have us?
I don't think we've quite got to that stage yet. I'd like to see a jolly good iron out at the States of Alderney and a good sort out. And for that, I believe we need fundamental change, but it's being ignored. I believe that one of the things that would help is the difficulty that the public face is that they're not happy about the things that happen within P&F committee, policy and finance. And so what really wants to happen is there needs to be a more proactive push from the States members in that committee to push items out of P&F and onto the main billet and up for discussion with the public. And there have been, for instance, this tax situation that we've been talking about. They have not wanted that. They have not wanted that to come out of the P&F committee and be discussed in the States. They're always having the decision made, first of all, in P&F before it goes on today. And that, to my mind, is wrong. Those are big decisions to amalgamate tax, to change things. They're big decisions to put the ambulance onto the tax. And they should, first and foremost, have gone straight on the billet to the public.
Yeah.
In the first place, there should have been, because there's a tendency now to, there's another little trick which I don't like, and I can talk about as I'm leaving. And that is now, for a long time now, what they've done is they put the billet item that they've already decided in P&F. So it's a rubber stamping exercise, but they also put the name of all the attendees of the P&F meeting at which they gave approval. So that's like saying to you, you have to do it now because you were at the meeting, you voted for it. Do you follow what I mean? That, to my mind, those are not nice tactics. They're not nice tactics amongst people who've come with an innocence and a willingness to serve.
It sort of knocks out the meaning of democracy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah. Now, the wildlife legislation, that seems to be a sledgehammer to crack a nut at a particularly inappropriate time, bearing in mind there are lots more pressing subjects. And I hear that Guernsey have said, we'll have a look at it, but it may take 10 years.
Well, good for Guernsey. Guernsey are protecting Alderney. They're protecting the landowning interests. I agree. It is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. We don't really know properly where it's come from. It's too much, and a lot of the controls are already there. And my view is this: if anybody wants to talk about the compulsory purchase of land or anything like that, that those powers are vested in the States of Alderney, where they should remain. And they're fairly apportioned in a way that if ever they had to be used, and goodness me, utterly the last resort would be to use any kind of power of that nature. I'm a great believer in using the minimum of power to get to where you need to be.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying about that is this. If ever there were a situation that the Wildlife Trust felt they had to come to the States to talk about purchasing land, then conversations would be had with landowners and what have you, but it would be done through the States. No separate body beyond the States of Alderney should even be able to look at those kind of powers. I think it would be wrong. And I think that the wildlife legislation, unfortunately, is over enthusiastic, to say the least, and it should be thrown out. You've frozen on me. Have I lost you? Are you still there, Tony? I've lost you, Tony.